talk a little bit about studying the RFP. So we've talked about what its purpose is and why it's important. But, you know, the RFP itself is your roadmap to proposal development. There are many people that don't like to, but I do like to print it out when I'm involved in a review. You'll read it again, find out where the money's coming from. You don't necessarily scan it the first time you're looking through. You're kind of looking through it a little bit carefully and in depth. Some of the things you want to be looking for to mark it up. Underline action verbs. We know in federal policy and federal guidance, keywords such as must, may, shall, will, etc., those types of things are going to make a difference. Because if an RFP says that you must include something, that's very different than saying you may want to include something. And if you leave it out, there's a problem. So highlight significant portions that catch your eye the first read through. Don't read it 3 times in one sitting, because of course you're going to just basically look at the same thing over and over again and not see anything new. Come back to it after reading it, go back to it and look and see what some more details are after you've done that. A few other things to look at. Get every detail on paper, maybe, if you're a detail writing type person. One of the things that are a good tool is recommend that your principal investigator use the RFP as an outline for their writing. When they're going to write that proposal, maybe have them use that as a template for writing the proposal, because program officers and reviewers will be looking at it in that manner as well. Of course, work with your faculty if you see something that appears to be an inconsistency. I know for us, when faculty read RFPs and they come to us many times to say, this doesn't make sense to me, can you explain what this means? In some cases, because we may know the agency or we're familiar with that type of language, we'll be able to say, oh yes, this is what you need to do with this. But there actually may be times where you're going to have to reach out to a program officer or a program contact or grant contact, depending on who they say to touch base with, to say, you know, can you clarify what this means in this RFP? Program officers are great about getting back to you and giving a response, because again, they want to see people succeed. But on the flip side, if there are things that we submit that are problematic, money is slim in many cases. So the program officers do have to have a number of proposals eliminated. So that's why the RFP and adherence to it is critical. For many, it could be overwhelming because the RFP is loaded with a lot of information, grant terminology, abbreviations that may make sense to the program, but not necessarily to a layman reading it. So be sure to read carefully, because the smallest overlooked detail can have a proposal returned without review. Keep in mind that there's some RFPs may only be about 5 pages long, and you would think this is great. This is only a 5, this is an easy read. What they don't necessarily say immediately, but you'll find it, is guess what? This is your RFP, but we're going to refer back to, I'm going to use the example of the National Science Foundation because I'm going to be working with them. They have the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPPG. The first 101 pages of the 185-page document is related to proposals. So, that's something to think about. And one of the reasons I like to do these types of webinars and talk about different processes and share best practices and other in these areas is, we all learn from each other in the research administration community. So I'd like to ask both Shelly and Hagan to share some of their best practices. Shelly, I'll start with you.
Hey, as Tony was saying, I'm also a paper person. So one of the things that I will do with an RFP is I will print it and I start reading it and I pull out my handy little highlighter and start going to town with it. As Hagan said, one of the first things I look for is eligibility. Like, are we even eligible to submit this? And then we go from there. I look at due dates. And what I like to do is go through the RFA and I will highlight it, read it as I go, and then I'll set it aside and I like to come back to it and then read the sections that I did not highlight. because a lot of times you can sometimes become complacent when you're reading these RFPs. You know what you're looking for, so you see that in an RFP and you just mark that up. But you never know if something has changed, what may be going on. Is there some sort of special criteria needed in a certain solicitation? So it's always good to go back and look at the things you didn't mark up. One of the things I do in that case is I'll go back, and when I look at it for a second time, I'll use a different color highlighter. So I know, hey, I didn't catch this one in the first read over, and so maybe it is that I highlighted in a different color, so I make sure I go back to that and I'm including whatever that component may have been whenever I'm processing the proposal. So Hagan, what are your secrets?
So I am definitely not the person that prints now after a year of working at home, and I am also definitely not someone that would highlight. I have been known to star and to underline and to make notes in the margins and all of those good things. I think overall, though, the RFP is the first thing you read, the last thing you read, and something you refer back to over and over and over again. I think I would just say I use the search and find in my electronic document and make sure that if there's an item that I'm looking at, sometimes sponsors will mention it in multiple places in an RFP. And so in using that search and find, you can see all of the different areas in which an item might be mentioned. And so perhaps formatting is in one section, but the required elements is in another. Some item that you need to include, say if it's a budget justification, is in another area. The number of the attachment that it should be referred to as could be in another place, right? So we need to go pick up all of those. I would say very important with the RFP is to tell your faculty to read the whole thing in its entirety. I know that a lot of times they send us something, they think we've read it, that that's sufficient. It's not. We need them to read. It's okay to say your homework is to spend the weekend reading this and come back and talk to me about it again on Monday. And the best thing is when they come back to you and say, I did my homework, I've read it. You know, now you can get off on the proposal development path kind of on better ground. I would recommend and caution that if you identify that your project team or that you are skipping over an item, so something that your eyes are just kind of glazing over, you've not really addressed, you don't know who's handling that item, stop in your tracks, assign it to someone, determine what needs to be completed to fulfill that requirement. Be very cautious. It's kind of like Shelly's comment about going back and reading the things that are unhighlighted. What perhaps are you overlooking? Because those are the things that are going to sneak up on submission day and nobody is going to have addressed. Finally, my last tip is personally, right before submission, I will flip through the RFP backwards. So starting at the back and really looking at the information on each page. The reason I do that is it kind of prevents my brain from filling in the gaps and again, kind of glossing over, thinking that I've read it all before, and it makes you stop and look at each item and say, do I really have this? And have I absolutely uploaded it to the application portal? So those would be my best tips on this.